The system that is bequeathed to us by the founding fathers vaguely resembles, in terms of its functional power, the system that we get by World War II. It changes quite a bit in how liberty or freedom or even the power of government is conceived through American history. And one of the early examples of this is Andrew Jackson. Interesting president because he kind of swept away the old political order that had dominated the United States since its founding. The system of gentlemen, you could say, these rich, educated elites who were being elected and playing this sort of power-sharing game with each other, where even though you had competing factions in different political parties, when a single president was elected, he would appoint members of the opposite political party to his cabinet if he thought that they deserved it, if they were capable enough and meritorious, despite the political differences. Jackson swept that system aside as part of this greater gambit to strengthen the power of the executive. When he got in and became president, and he was representing the new common man, this new kind of political class that had just achieved the right to vote. They were able to vote for the first time without land ownership. He ran this populist campaign where he represented this sort of new enfranchised class and their interests against the established banker elites in the North or the Southern planter class in the South. And when he became president to strengthen the executive branch, he said, I'm not appointing people who disagree with me or members of the opposite political party to my cabinet. I'm appointing loyalists and my friends, the people I like, the people I know who are going to follow my orders and do what I want. And he was criticized by his political opponents for this, and he gave the famous quote, "To the victor goes the spoils. I won the presidency, so I get the spoils of its power. I get to utilize it and leverage it however I want." He also strengthened federal power in certain ways, despite being largely a states' rights kind of guy. That was largely his platform. But when it served his interests, when it was beneficial to him, he strengthened the executive branch. In the nullification crisis, this was totally exemplified. There was a tariff that was passed in Congress that was deeply unpopular because it would, especially in the South, because it would harm exports, essentially. And the South was making most of its money at this time by exporting cotton to the rest of the world. In the 1830s, this American South was producing about 80% of the world's cotton, exporting it to the rest of the world. And their economic interests, they didn't want that to be interfered with. They didn't want any sort of tariff or anything that could harm it. South Carolina passed a law that basically stated that it could nullify federal laws that the state disagreed with. So, and they exercised this power to nullify the tariff that had been put on by the federal government. Jackson, despite being a states' rights advocate, didn't like that because it was going against his measures and his order. And he was going to send the full-on U.S. military into South Carolina to basically force the state government to comply with the tariff. He did send U.S. naval vessels, a few gunboats, to blockade the Charleston Harbor and whatnot. He was going for it. It almost led to an early outbreak of civil war in a sense until they came to a compromise tariff. Henry Clay negotiated it and got the state legislatures in South Carolina to acquiesce to the demands. There would be a tariff, but it would decrease every year. And it avoided it. But he set the stage for this type of federal action, that the federal government can use the army against a state if it's not abiding by federal power. That was a huge shift away from the original model of states' rights and federal power that the Founding Fathers fiercely debated but set up as well. And it was an early preview of what would happen with the Civil War. Without going into the entire Civil War, at its end, it really settled the question about the power of the federal government over the states. There's always arguments about whether the states in the South had the right legally, constitutionally, to secede from the Union over the slavery issue. And whether they had a constitutional basis or not for doing that, the issue was settled with military force. through federal power, Lincoln used the army to reunify the country and subjugate the southern states and bring them back into the Union, and then used federal power to basically set the stage for Reconstruction. He wouldn't get to live out his plan because he was assassinated 3 days after the war, but his successor, Johnson, carried on the Reconstruction project and basically prevented the southern states from even forming state governments at one point until they acquiesced to certain oaths of loyalty and demands that were made by the federal government. Grant's Reconstruction government was even more severe when he put the South under martial law to prevent them from forming any sort of state legislation or sending representatives to Congress. The point being, federal government strongly solidified states' rights, or their ability of states to create particular local legislation outside of federal oversight or parameters, had basically ended. It's gone now. And the federal government, is emerging as the definitive true power in the United States. And the state governments, they're lesser. They have to basically abide by and kowtow to federal law at all times. That's already a major departure from the original vision, you could say, of freedom and liberty that the founding fathers devised. The strengthening of the executive branch continues. Many examples, but I think of like Teddy Roosevelt off the top of my head, showing that the federal government, with his trust-busting policies, could intervene in the economy and start breaking up private companies that were deemed monopolies. It could seize their assets and sell them. So that was totally acceptable now, given this policy. It set a new sort of paradigm for government involvement in the economy. It could intervene and take private assets if it needed to and break it up. Then, you see FDR, of course, the New Deal plan, this massive expansion of the federal government that we talked about on another episode. But what you see here is a new type of American state, and one that's concentrating through the arc of history greater and greater power into the federal government, and in many ways into the executive branch itself. That's such a radical departure from the original vision. As I've said, it's difficult for me to conceive of some of these exceptional American values like freedom, liberty, the pursuit of happiness in the same terms. I think what we had initially is something that approximated those values. It was enshrined in it, but we also had the right circumstance, the right time, a vast frontier that you could basically go out and settle on with very little government involvement. The technology, the material conditions of the time allowed a true freedom and liberty to exist. But in the modern state, with this greater concentration of federal power, with the vast American bureaucracy, with all of these different departments, with mass surveillance through technology, I don't know if we have freedom or liberty in the exact same way. If you enjoy history content like this, make sure you give us a like and a follow. It helps us out a lot, and it makes me happy.